So very quick update. I think you guys are familiar with the background of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to model the Miocene using ACCESS ESM 1.5, and you've heard a little bit about what's gone on in the past. So I will just skim through the start here, which is to say that the Miocene is important because it may well resemble the future, right? CO2 is going up by a long way. We know from the past geological records that our CO2 range is very much pointing towards the Miocene and the Oligocene. If we go way over the top, we might end up at the Eocene. So, right. These past climates are good analogs for, drastic climate change. Let's say that. So in terms of reconfiguring the model, I've started with some small perturbations. So the first thing I did was to close Drake Passage, and then open the Panama Gateway. And these are like small examples of adding a little bit of extra land and adding a little bit of extra ocean to see if we can do that. So we've managed to do that, and now we've also got a working test case of the Miocene, and the Miocene is basically lots of new land and grid cells, land and ocean grid cells in lots of different places, so not just a tiny little change. So just to illustrate the idea, on the left I've got the pre-industrial for Drake Passage and for Panama, and on the right I've got those little perturbations that I was talking about. So in the top right, I'm adding some grid cells across Drake Passage, and in the bottom right I'm taking some land away from the Panama Gateway, so that you then have 1,000 meters depth. And so then I guess the challenge is then you make this change in the ocean. That's the first step in the process, and then you want to reconfigure all the rest of the restart files, all of the exchange files, all the coupling inputs, so that it's all consistent. Reinitialize the whole thing, and you can run it. So we've got a couple of these test cases running. I know that Hutchinson is interested in also closing the Bering Strait, and we're having conversations about setting that up as well. I think Panama Open might be of interest to Gabriel Pontes, because he's looking at the Pliocene, and this is something that potentially might be interesting to the Pliocene, which is a little bit more recently, bit more recent than the Miocene, but it's also an interesting analog of a warm past climate. So then the step after that, of course, is to implement the same kind of changes in the atmosphere model. So you use a conservative remapping from those perturbations that we've made in the ocean, and put it onto the land sea mask, the land fraction according to the atmospheric grid. And again, so the top right here is our new land fraction with Drake Passage closed. You can see how those grid cells kind of get smeared out in a slightly different way, but it's all consistent as possible with the perturbations. And likewise in the top right, you can see how we've perturbed the land fraction when we're opening the Panama Gateway. And so the bottom row of plots is just showing how the binary land sea mask changes. So the binary has to be either there's land or there's nothing, and so that has to then be consistent with the fractional land mask. Right. So what we're trying to do is do it for the Miocene. If you have a look at this map, this is our boundary conditions that we're trying to implement. All the continents are roughly in the same position, but there's fairly extensive changes to Antarctica, to the Arctic region, to various gateways around North America, and in the Mediterranean. It's open through to the Indian Ocean. So there's lots of little changes everywhere. And if you just look at how that looks in the Arctic, you can see there's some pretty large changes in the Barents Sea. So the Barents Sea is kind of north of Scandinavia. Suddenly we've got a huge amount of blocked ocean there, and also Bering Strait is shut. And in fact, this is interesting because this geometry on the right-hand side of the Arctic being really closed up leads to, at least in some other simulations I've got using the GFDL model, this leads to a very low salinity of the Arctic, which then has important implications for the AMOC. So if you have a low salinity in the Arctic and some kind of outflow of that low salinity water mass, that can very easily kill your Atlantic overturning. And so then you have kind of an interesting threshold problem as to when do you get Atlantic overturning and when you don't. Right, so implementing that in the ACCESS ESM, so the left-hand side is our pre-industrial, that's the default case. The right-hand side is how the land fraction looks now for the UM model. Lots of cells are changing, so we have to then kind of make that all consistent to restart. So the current status is I can get the model running with this Miocene land sea mask for a 1 year of simulation in a couple of different ways. This is great, but I'm still having problems with orography. So the orography variables, there are 7 different orography variables. They are this height, this silhouette area of unresolved orography, peak to trough unresolved orography divided by 2, standard deviation, and then 3 different gradient components. So I can make it work in 2 ways. One is to do a nearest neighbor interpolation from the pre-industrial file to the Miocene land sea mass. So just ignoring the fact that we have continental movement and just pretending that we can just extrapolate from the current present day. If you do that, it works, right? So somehow these variables kind of have to be gelled together, I think. If you change one, the other thing I can do is to make the orography completely flat. So I can run it with like 10 meter topography everywhere, set a bunch of low values for all these other orography component variables. But let's say if I just changed variable number 1, the height, that's where I have a very clearly defined boundary condition, and I don't update all of the other variables, the model will crash. And I think that's because things that happen within the mountain drag, they have to kind of be in sync with the orography that's in the model. So essentially, the task now is to reverse engineer these other variables. You can look at those variables in the restart file of the UM model, and you can probably make sense of some of them, but I don't know how to exactly reproduce what's in there, because I think they've done some funny tricks to smooth it a little bit, and those restart files, those variables that are in there are probably relics of well over a decade ago, and the exact procedure to recreate those variables is not easy, or probably impossible to find. So what I've done is I've gotten in touch with the people in Bristol. So Paul Valdez especially has been playing with these variables for decades, and Sebastian Steinig is newer onto the but they are doing deep time paleoclimate simulations in Bristol using the Hadley Center models, and so they have some idea of how to reconstruct these component variables. So I'm getting advice from them. They've been very helpful in sending me a whole lot of information they got from the Met Office and from their own sort of experimentation. It's a bit of a process, figuring that out. But so I just wanted to also say I've got this. Hang on. Let me just see if I can get out of the presentation. Yeah, so I am writing a user story on the Hive, where I'm trying to. So it's this paleoclimate user story wiki. I've got very brief descriptions of all the scripts I've used to set up these restart files. So I've got part 1, which is just creating the restart files, and part 2, which is to set up the experiment. So it's putting it all into the PARU workflow. Part 2 is very much not complete. So I've started this. I haven't followed through to the end yet. But I've got a GitHub repository as well. Where is it? Here. Yeah. And so in this GitHub repository, I've got the scripts I've got to this is what I've used to make the topography in the ocean, to update some restart files. For instance, you've got the coupler grids. I've got some scripts here to reconfigure the coupler grids, and then also for the atmosphere restart file. Got some scripts here to do this. Anyone is welcome to go and look at those and get ideas if it would be helpful. My suspicion is that these scripts are going to need somebody who understands how to make software more accessible to help me do that, because I'm not that person. I'm not the person who knows how to make software really usable and robust. I know how to do a hacky thing that works for me. So happy to share what I've done, but I'll probably need help. And I think, maybe we can talk to people like ACCESS-NRI as to how we can integrate that into some larger workflow. I can, if you want me to adapt this to a different configuration, that's fine. I can do that. If you want me to make it really generally usable for others, I can't do that. I need help with that. So that's where we're at. And of course, I'm not finished. I haven't solved all the orography things yet. Stay tuned. I will hopefully get a little bit further with it next time. That's it.
Thanks a lot, David. That's great, and great you're putting all of it on the Hive and on GitHub. Did you put the link on the Hive to the GitHub?
Yeah.
Or
so the Hive story has the link to the GitHub repository.
Okay.
I'll put it all in the notes. You should be able to find that afterwards.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not promising that this software is going to be really user friendly or anything, but it's there. It's what I've done. So
I think it's a good start. But just one question about the orographic crashing. I mean, from what you showed of the Miocene map, I mean, there's a lot of changes and the continents are moving too, right? So, I mean, to me, it's not so surprising that it would crash, but I wonder if you could just find a way to basically make those other variable linked to the height that you put. So basically they would read your height mask so they could see where it's high, where it's low. And based on that, they would put numbers because basically you have your peak to trough. And let's say if you are on the ocean at 0, but suddenly with the displacement, your peak to trough is 2,000, then the model will crash, right?
So I think to some extent you could,
I think those variables have to be linked to somehow be linked to the height, right?
Yeah. So I agree in the sense that like you could correlate them. You could do like just a straight correlation of those other variables with the total height, and you could come up with some sort of an empirical mapping from one to the other. I think where you might have issues though is like on the edges of like a big plateau, let's say the edges of the Tibetan plateau, you've got, if you look at what's happening with, say, the gradient variables, there's a very clear kind of on one side of the mountains it does this, and on the other side of the mountains it does something the opposite, you know, and those things aren't going to work particularly well with a straight correlation. Also, like, say, the edges of some of the Antarctic mountain ranges, again, like there's things to do with the edges which very much influence the gradient, but not some of the other ones, if you know what I mean. So, so I do want to try, I can't get it perfect, right? But I do want to make it sort of physically consistent if possible. Some of the, like standard deviation, I know how to do a standard deviation within a grid cell. I can come up with something and it's fine, but it doesn't look the same as what's in the UM model now. And that's not because the topography of the present day has changed dramatically since they created that restart file. It's because they did some weird stuff that they, you know, I don't know how to recreate. So, so I can reverse engineer some stuff. It's not gonna go exactly the same as what was in there, but hopefully we can get it working. That's sort of consistent with our Miocene model and workable.
So do you think Paul Valdes' team has some masks that could work for you?
So I mean they've sent me some documents, like and some, you know, some ideas on how they tackle those things. Their exact lensing masks are going to look different because, well, most of their simulations have been done with a lower resolution model and different ocean components and stuff. So all of those things about, like, you know, where exactly is.
So what you will need is you will need a high resolution height mask, and from this high resolution height mask you would create the one you need at low resolution, and from this high resolution you would then calculate all the variables that you need. That's what you need to do.
That's pretty much, that's it. So the Miocene input file is 1/2 degree resolution. I can use that as a starting point. And like I in terms of some of the roughness, like the gradient things, I can potentially use eTopo in some way. Like, so I'm somewhat familiar with G-plates, which is the software used to rotate the continents back in time. And I can talk to someone like Nikki Wright, who's like really an expert in reconstructing those things, and she can sort of pull these things around and say, all right, well, the eTopo goes like this, and you can kind of get as much. Let's say it's possible for us to get like a 0.1 degree resolution paleogeography data set if we really want, if that's what we need to make these restart files, we can get that, and then we can just use like a high res input file. So I guess there's a bit of sorting out how you do that, but look, at the moment, my priority is just get it working, right? If we get it working, then we can make it better later.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Can I just ask a question? Hey Dave, have you tried any other boundary conditions, or are you having issues just with orography, and how are you going on other boundary conditions?
So do you mean like different, not the Miocene, you mean like something other than the Miocene, or do you mean it's the other inputs that might be to blame.
No, just simulate the Miocene. Do you need to change just orography, or do you need to change all the boundary conditions?
Yeah, I think all the other boundary conditions are fine. Like, so I can get it running with a flat orography or with a nearest neighbor interpolated orography, and it's just those 7 variables, I think, which are to blame now for it crashing. So yeah, we have come a fair way in terms of sorting out the other inputs. At one point, I was having trouble with the temperature salinity restart file, but I just set up a really idealized case instead, and so yeah, it's. I think at the moment, it's the main problem is just getting those different orography variables set up. I actually haven't gone through things like, how do I change the CO2, right? That's a fairly basic thing to change. Like, that's, you know, I figure that's going to be quick to solve, but like, you know, there's a few things I still need to sort out that I haven't talked about. But yeah.
Yeah, no, CO2 should be fine. And don't worry about it.
Right. And in terms of getting a proper restart file for the Miocene, I have a set of simulations going with the GFDL coupled model, and that's already been running for 1,500 years or something. So I've got some reasonable spin up that I can use as like a starting point once I get those other issues sorted out. So yeah, I think we're pretty close. It's just that there's some sticky things to fix up.
Fine. Thanks, Dave.
Hayden?
Hi, Dave. Can you not use the GFDL orography and sort of adapt it for the UM?
So the GFDL model has significantly lower resolution, and it doesn't have these 7 different inputs. It's just got you just put in a high, if you want to do mountain drag stuff, you just put in a high resolution topography and it figures out the details for you. Whereas for the UM model, you've got to put in these 7 different things. So it's not directly, so I've tried just using the height, right? In the ACCESS ESM, and it just crashes, right? So I need to make something work with the other ones. Yeah,